when the attack happens, the CISO will do all they can, but it's the CEO and the executives that'll be in the limelight and making the decisions. They'll be the ones that have to make the calls on, do we turn everything off? Who do we tell? How quickly do we have to tell our customers? How do we get our employees organized? It becomes a collective exercise or activity. So while your CISO might take responsibility until the event of an attack, when an attack happens, you'll all be involved.
Welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring how to balance profit with purpose in an increasingly complex world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host and founder of TrueMark. And today we're going to be discussing the article Cybersecurity is Everyone's Responsibility, which argues that digital safety now depends as much on everyday human behaviour and culture as it does on technology and systems. I'm absolutely delighted to say that my guest today to unpack all of this is Joseph Hubback, advisor, partner, CICO, board member, and long-time leader in global cybersecurity and technology. Joe, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, Charlie.
Now, Joe, I very, very briefly introduced your numerous sort of areas of focus. For those of our listeners and viewers who are immediately thinking, I'm going to head over to LinkedIn, I'm going to find this chaff and have a good old dig through. Just give us a little bit more meat on the bone as to what your work currently involves.
So at the moment, I wear two hats. I'm a partner here at Elixir, which means I serve clients, but I also have an internal role as our company CISO. So I'm responsible for the cybersecurity of Elixir and trying to keep 750 unruly, bright young things behaving correctly around the world as they're out serving clients. And then on the other side, as a sort of normal client partner, I serve clients on their topics of interest and predominantly on cybersecurity.
What's that like for you? I speak to CSOs a lot about the experience of both looking at the internal kind of sustainability strategies, etc., for the organization, but also working with clients externally. From a cybersecurity perspective, what's that like for you, juggling both the internal and working externally with clients?
To be honest, I find it's actually really helpful because it means that I have to keep up to speed with the risk profile of our company. I stay operational, and then that helps me better understand the client context and better be a client advisor, and better, in many ways, empathize with the client CISOs and the stresses and strains they face, because I feel the same things when I'm thinking about Elixir's security and resilience. So I find it's actually really valuable on both sides. It actually helps me be a better CISO for Elixir as well, because I'm in that conversation with other professionals every day.
A two-way street of learning, if you like.
Exactly.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Now, I do feel like I'm sat with, I've never spoken to anybody about cybersecurity before, so you're going to have to be very gentle with me, Joe, as we head through things. But how did we get here? How did you end up in the roles that you're in?
I'm in cybersecurity now because a number of sort of different elements came into play. It wasn't by design. I started my career as an engineer in the factories of ICI, actually before I even went to university. Was sponsored by them, and since I was a teenager, I've always wanted to be involved in, supporting and developing industrial Britain and the Britain that works. I was inspired by people like Sir John Harvey Jones when he was running a TV show about transforming British industry. And so I entered the world of work as an engineer, building factories, building control systems, really in the weeds of how industry works. I really enjoyed that and love working in ICI and a couple of follow-on businesses. But I wanted to go and do advisory work because I thought you see many more different environments. It's really interesting. So I went and joined McKinsey in the late noughties. And actually, purely because I think I was the only available consultant with a British passport.
Always helpful.
I got put onto some security related work.
Right.
So that was where my security journey started.
Do you know what I absolutely love about interviewing senior people like yourself is the number of you that turn around and go, it was all essentially, nobody goes, it was totally planned out from the O to 18. It's all gone exactly to plan. It's so humanizing and accessible, I think, for other people that are aspiring to do, similarly, or hopefully to do impactful things with their careers, to hear that it's not simply planned out from the beginning.
No, well, to be honest, I had a plan, but I failed to meet it. My plan was 5 years in industry, 5 years in consulting, and then start my own thing.
Right.
But I got stuck in industry for 10, got stuck in consulting for 10, and then was too old to start my own thing. So if people want to start businesses, I'd advise them do it straight from university.
I want to take you back to teenage you and your passion and enthusiasm for British industry and working within British industry.
Yeah.
Looking at where we are, however many years down the road, I'm just thinking about some previous conversations that I've had about the state of British industry and in particular manufacturing. Yeah. What's your judgment on how things have progressed or not during the time that since you've been working?
So the first thing I'd say is the British industry still has a world-class profile.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's subscale versus what it could be. But I do think that we are still at the leading edge or in the leading group in terms of being able to run industry, innovate in industry, and deliver, real value for the country. Now, within that context, I think there's been a massive transformation. Mm-hmm. Jobs have had to change. We've lost jobs to the global supply chain, which has been relatively natural. What I think needs to change to get the most out of British industry is to level the playing field. British industry holds itself to very high standards, driven by our need to be more sustainable, look after our planet, whereas we're able to import products and goods and services that are not necessarily produced in the same way, and that then compromises our ability to compete. We are a very creative and innovative country with really high quality ability to manufacture, to innovate, to do science, and I think we should be encouraging it.
Do you think, I'm smiling away because firstly your point on essentially outsourcing the problems associated with sustainability and the way that we've got ourselves in such a pickle by doing that because we've just gutted our own industry. I had a conversation recently with a lady working in the ceramics industry and talking about, and it's a brick company. Yeah. She described exactly that the Paris Agreement, etc. We've essentially created conditions whereby we are greenwashing ourselves essentially about the impact that we're having. Your broader point about, we are still a world-class, innovative country. Do you think we forget that collectively at times? Do you think we're a bit down on ourselves collectively as a country and the role that we have to play in the world?
Yeah, 100%. I think we need to recognize that we're actually a very creative, very innovative, and can be a very productive country and people. And I think that we need to tell that story as a country. We need to recognize the brilliant engineers, creatives, designers, production workers, everybody, that we are a very strong country in the sense of delivering high quality products, designing high quality products and services. And I think we should be prouder of that. I don't think we need to sort of fly the flag in terms of trying to beat other countries. I think we need to play a part in responsible leadership of industry and engineering and all of these topics with other countries and see it as partnering and working more collaboratively to actually get things working.
The UK, in essence, needs to go through a proper branding exercise. We need to get some really good, clear, directional values that we can all buy into, and that we can be motivated, be inspired by the narratives that we can tell about the country. It feels like it's lost. It feels like there's so much criticism, there's so much angst, there's so much what we were, what we're not now, etc. That forward-thinking view is perhaps a little lost.
And I think it can come from encouraging entrepreneurs, because I don't look to the government to do this for us. I think the government needs to make sure the system is well set to support industry and commerce, but I look to business leaders to stand up and tell these inspiring stories, to pull everybody along. I do an awful lot of work in America, and the personalities at the top of industry and commerce and business are the big voices. And I think that there's space for our business leaders to stand up and have big voices and inspire the nation. We need a national narrative coming from business and industry. We have incredible academic institutions. We have incredible infrastructure. We have there are challenges, but we still have a brilliant educational system. So we need to hear more about that, talk more about it, and inspire people to go out there and, invest in the future.
Well, Joe, you have brilliantly plugged us for any business leaders out there in the UK that want to come on the Responsible Edge podcast to come and do exactly that. Let's move forward with the article this week. Would you mind just briefly introducing and summarising it?
So the article was cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. And it talks about the various parties involved in security and the requirement for better collaboration, how security is more than just a technical question, and it needs to involve, people and the business side of things and all of these kind of things. So it's very much about how to make the most of everybody's contribution to cybersecurity. Unfortunately, in my view, it's actually the same old story. And that's my challenge with the article, is I'm trying to find something new in there. And I'm not sure we're really breaking through. Now, I don't know what the nuances are, and I'm happy to debate that with you, but there's a few points in there that I'm happy to pick up on. But it feels a bit same old to me.
How long? So the thing that fascinated me as a complete laggard when it comes to all things cyber and particularly security, how long has it been like this then? How long have we known that this is the sort of state of play, and sort of how out of date is it therefore?
So the article talks about, I think, saying, 10 years ago, cyber was seen as a technical thing, but now it's much more about, people and organizations. I just don't think that's true. 15 years ago, we were having the same conversations saying cybersecurity is now no longer just a technical issue. It's a political. And so I'm literally reading this article thinking, it's not that 10 years ago we were like myopically focused on technology. 15 years ago, we were talking about it's a people issue as much as anything else. So what I find frustrating is that I don't know why we keep thinking it's a revolution to say cybersecurity is not just technology. That's an example of where I suppose we've got stuck. And I don't know why we've got stuck into a sense of our thinking hasn't moved forward. Now, what I find interesting is that I wonder if there's a complacency coming in. So we did some research last year looking at attitudes to security at the board level, and actually discovered incredibly that in about 1,000 companies we surveyed, 94% of their boards felt comfortable with their security posture.
Wow.
Which is, I'm glad to hear they think that. Yeah. But actually looking at the reality of successful cyber attacks every week, I think that's misplaced confidence. So somehow we seem as a society to have not moved our thinking forward in security. Maybe it's been talked about long enough now that people start to think, we must have solved that. And I think that we need a clearer-eyed perspective on where we really are at in terms of cybersecurity and resilience.
And on that, is it, again, because I'm going to pick out some things from the article and you can tell me if I'm getting this completely wrong, but the two kind of core elements for me that I picked out regarding, how do we address this issue? And I appreciate it's out of date, were we need to educate people more
Yeah.
about the issue, so they're
Yeah.
more sort of personally aware of what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we need that cross sort of entity collaboration and partnership to share insights, to share best practice, etc., etc. With those, I believe those are the two focuses. What are the other things that could feasibly be done in order to address the cybersecurity issue beyond those two things?
Well, so, I mean, let's talk about the education and the collaboration points, and then I'll add in some other perspectives. But I think the education point has been misdirected.
Okay.
I agree that there's not enough understanding of cybersecurity and its relevance and how to deal with it. But we've been trying to educate people on spotting the techniques of the hackers.
Right.
You know, you have phishing training, or you have, you know, these games that you do to try and figure out if you're, you know, how you respond. What instead I think is the way we should be thinking about educating people is, what are the new assets that you're trying to protect?
Okay.
So if you think about, we've gone from an analog to a digital world.
Uh-huh.
In the analog world, in 20 years ago, the things you'd care about are your cash and your keys and your physical being, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody went near your wallet, you'd be like, hey, what are you doing going near my wallet?
Yeah.
Or if someone went near your house keys, you'd be like, stay away from my keys, right? Now, what we need to do is educate people that their assets have become digital.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, they need a sense of protecting those assets, such that when something comes near to them, somebody asks for access to them, or somebody talks to you about one of your digital assets, whether it's your identity, your phone, your e-wallet, whatever it may be, your sense of risk needs to be raised in the same way that you would be if somebody comes near you physically and seems to be, you know, looking for something. And I think that educating people on what they're trying to protect is going to be much more effective than trying to teach them that's how the hackers are doing it today or tomorrow, because that's always changing.
And does that also, what you're suggesting there, lend itself to people being more proactive in the way that they then protect their assets? The outcome
exactly,
is
because
that
they own the protection of their assets, and then they think, well, how am I, if something comes along, how am I going to be aware?
Yeah.
If somebody, and people are learning this slowly now, like if somebody calls and says, I'm calling from your bank, people are now like, okay, well, it might not be someone from the bank, so I'll call the bank back myself to validate that this really is my bank calling me. And so I think that if you explain to people what it is that is now important for them to protect, then there's a much better chance for them to then think through, how will I protect this myself? And then pull on the right products and services from the market.
And on that, coming back to your research, your 94%, which is a wild statistic, as you say.
We were very surprised.
Yeah, I bet you were. If and I'm applying that attitude that you've just described to these business leaders as well, which might be a step too far, but let's suggest that that's a common sort of perspective as well.
Yeah.
Is this change of, if we suddenly snapped our fingers and all of those leaders suddenly viewed the protection of their assets in the way that you just described, would you imagine that percentage would dramatically drop because ultimately they're viewing their assets in a different way?
Yes, and I've seen it happen in the last 12 months with a client. So we, in the last 12 months, have run a process, and it's something that we believe heavily in around creating risk transparency against your critical assets or value streams. And the novel thing here is to bring the business people who are running the company on a day-to-day business together with security and technology teams and have an open conversation starting from the business about what assets do you value. So in the same way we talked about the person who values their wallet and their keys, get the business people to say, this is how we make money. And you'd be so surprised how infrequently that happens, that conversation happens between the business and the security function. Security has become a bit obsessed with standards and frameworks. You know, are we ISO certified? Are we this level on NIST? Instead of actually saying, well, what does the company need us to protect? And letting the company tell the security organization, these are the 5 value streams that really need to be protected. This is how we make money. And if any of these things fall over, we're going to suffer a problem. An attack would cause us a real issue. Having that conversation then actually brings the business people into the mindset of, well, we can contribute to securing these assets. So they feel more connected to it. And what's actually happened in this client I'm describing is they've gone from the disconnect from the business saying security is just the department that says no, and they just get in my way, to being actually, we value your input. Please, can you help us secure all of these systems that you didn't realize were so critical, and add some levels of security. So I think that bringing people into the conversation, telling them to think about what they value, and then helping them understand where vulnerability may lie, it really transforms the whole conversation.
And we were touching upon the article and the fact that the article had identified education broadly as being one of the solutions to this. Yeah. What you've just described is, yes, education, but education, allowing people to understand their assets in this way and have that more proactive view of the way that then secure them from a cyber perspective.
Start from where they are, not start from turning up and saying you need to be this, that, and the other cybersecurity stuff, because nobody really cares about that.
And then I can imagine that I'm sitting there when I then get a survey come through from Alexa saying, how do I feel about cybersecurity? I go, oh yeah, we've definitely ticked that box over there. Got X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I've got a CISO, they're covering it. And that's the big mistake, because when the attack happens, the CISO will do all they can, but it's the CEO and the executives that'll be in the limelight and making the decisions. You know, they'll be the ones that have to make the calls on, do we turn everything off? Who do we tell? How quickly do we have to tell our customers? How do we get our employees organized? It becomes a collective exercise or activity. So while your CISO might take responsibility until the event of an attack, when an attack happens, you'll all be involved.
And presumably at that point, you see a dramatic change of tune when it comes to the way that people view their cybersecurity, and perhaps the investment in the innovative solutions that are required to protect their assets.
100%. And it's in the event of an attack that, you know, in that period thereafter, I think for execs that go through it at least lasts 3 to 4 years that they hold on to that sense of urgency on the topic. But they also, you mentioned earlier the point from the article around collaboration. They also see the reality of the value of collaboration and the reality of what collaboration is effective. Now, I was at a dinner last night with a group of CEOs of regulated industries, and they were also talking about the need for collaboration. And I pushed back a bit and I said, well, what do you mean? Because this is the other thing the article talks about, is about this need for collaboration. Now, we've been saying the same thing forever. And it's like, get this group together, get that group together. What does it really mean? And they'll sort of share ideas for a bit. And I do believe in sharing knowledge, and I'm fully supportive of that. But what I think organizations need to ask themselves is, what deal do I need to make with other parties that will make my organization more resilient in the event of an attack? And what I mean by that is, who am I going to rely on, and how will I rely on them in the event of attack? Now, there's a great story of a law firm that was attacked by NotPetya, DLA Piper, famously done. Andrew Darwin, inspirational CEO, he talks a lot about, in the event of that cyber attack, how incredible it was the way that his customers and his competitors responded to help them. They helped them with capacity, they helped them with office space, they helped them with a whole, they helped them get the information back that they lost in the attack. You know, we've still got copies of this contract, you've lost it because you've lost your systems. And the group came together and helped the company get back on its feet. And so one thing that I think is interesting is to understand, what kind of deal can I do with my customers in advance to say, look, if there's an attack, this is how we're going to respond, and have a commitment to shared responsibility and to support each other. I think that there's an untapped opportunity there to create fibers or connections that create resilience that we haven't done yet. So I like the talk of collaboration. We've been doing it for 20 years. I'd like us to get from collaboration to, force, well, what's the contract then?
I've had so many conversations on the show where we've talked about partnership and collaboration, and you're right. it just is the same old thing. It's great. It's wonderful. Should we get a group together? Should we do a bit of this and a bit of that? And you just think, what is coming from it?
Exactly.
And you're spot on. Like, if we can actually get to, right, let's cut that and get to the commercial reality of how we're going to make this work.
What's the deal?
I love your idea of a deal. I love the idea of, it's not about, lovely pats on the back, partnerships, working groups, collaboration. Oh, aren't we doing this fantastic stuff? What are the deals that we need to have in place in order to get this stuff right? But what you've described there, that takes real courage, does it not, to have that kind of proactive relationship or acknowledgement, if you like, with your stakeholder groups that, cyber attacks could feasibly happen. And by even engaging in that kind of dialogue, you are opening yourself up to additional scrutiny. But what would you say to that organization that's considering that? What's the benefit on the other side? I mean, you've just described it, but how would you counsel them through the process?
I think the first step is to know what they want from the deal. And so we talk a lot in the industry about exercising. And so I think the first thing you have to do is you have to run the scenario for we've been attacked. What do we think is going to happen? How will we need to respond? What are going to be the critical assets or capabilities we need to keep our organization going to service our stakeholders? These kind of questions. When you know what the critical things are that keep your business running, or you've got a sense of them because you've practiced it, then you know who to go and engage with to agree, how am I going to sort this out? What am I going to need to do? The analogy I draw, and one of the places I'm pulling on to start this is, imagine an industrial estate. I live in Hertfordshire. There's an industrial estate near me, 25 businesses there, all doing different things. What they could do is, if they, as small companies, they can't afford, enterprise grade cybersecurity, they get the basics. But what they could do is, if they realize that these people are running a print shop, this is an automotive business, as a logistics company. If they said, actually, the things that would knock us out is our lack of our PCs and our ordering systems, whatever, and we wouldn't be able to get onto the internet because everything would be broken. If that industrial estate had some kind of collective contract that says an attack on one is an attack on all, sorry to invoke NATO here, timely, but an attack on one is an attack on all, and we promise to give each other office space, we promise to give each other access to the internet, we will share maybe even our email service, so our email system, so that they can temporarily keep their business running, or we give them physical space, then it becomes tangible. Now that's a kind of a micro example of the kind of collaboration that DLA Piper saw, and I think businesses need to think about how do you do that in the event of customers. We've seen it with JLR and the major attack there, and how that affected the supply chain. And how can organizations actually take on capacity to do work, to help, to keep orders fulfilled, to keep things moving, while one of the elements is, under attack and needs to be rebuilt.
Just a slightly bigger, broader question for you on the state of sort of cybersecurity and your vision for the future. The article touched upon AI very, very briefly. Yeah, we're remiss of any conversation, I think, around cybersecurity without getting your view on this.
Yeah.
Like, what are the big challenges at play when it comes to cybersecurity over the next 5, 10, 15 years that you see?
So I think there's two big challenges I see, or two big challenges I'm focused on. One challenge is the rate of digital transformation, now being turbocharged by AI and the growth of that capability. If you want to create a secure or resilient environment, you need to know what environment you're managing. And one of the challenges for the security function over the last, since probably the mid-90s, is keeping up with the pace of digital evolution, to know what you're securing. And so I think there's a real challenge for security to keep up with digital transformation. So that's the first big thing I'd say, is that AI in and of itself is not necessarily a new, unique challenge. It's just made things move faster again. And we're going to have to learn how to secure and how to create resilience in that environment.
And I know you're going to come on to your second point, but with that first point, that you're coming back to your observation around starting with the auditing of, well, what assets do we value and what's important to us.
Yeah.
I imagine that then allows you to sort of map out and extrapolate and look at, okay, well, where do all the tentacles go from those key assets, and where do we therefore need to make sure we're covered?
Exactly. And so this is the point where it's not just the CISO, the chief exec, the executives need to know, or need to be clear on, where are we taking our business to? How is our digital landscape evolving? And therefore, what do we need to consider as the priorities for security?
Mm-hmm.
And so I call it specific security rather than systemic security. Mm-hmm. Systemic security is when you say we need a maturity model, we have to be ISO certified, etc. I think you have to balance that with specific security. To say, right, we're going to be deploying new AI tooling to serve our clients in this space, or to develop this new way of working. You then also need to make sure that you're keeping up your security posture in line with that. And that doesn't mean that you slow business down, but it does mean that you're aware of the risk you're taking on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way to cope with it, is to let these things move forward, but understand the risks, create some guardrails if you need to, because there may be, if there's a risk of physical harm from systems going wrong, then clearly you need to behave differently to if it's just a pure commercial issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that having that risk-based perspective and the transparency of what's being developed can enable security to keep up. And if you don't have that, then you're going to lose it. And that's the challenge.
And again, it comes back to, and I don't know what your second point is going to be, but again, it comes back to that role of leadership and that role of the C-suite across the board, having an appreciation and understanding of the risk profile associated with this, but equally viewing it as that protection of those key operational and valued assets of the company.
Yeah.
Second point.
So the second big challenge, I think, for the next 10 years, and this is a thing that I'm passionately working on, is still the human factor. Mm-hmm. And it's the human factor in behaviors of people running projects to deploy technology, cutting corners, bringing things out, not understanding the assets that they're building. And in the same way we talked earlier about individual security protection and behaviors to know what I'm trying to protect, there's a big human factor risk in, almost all cyber attacks involve some form of human error, human failure. And so the thing that we've not yet figured out is how to properly engage the people that are building systems and running systems to be security aware. So we talk about defending, the consumer, but also we need to think about those who are building and running systems and their behaviors to reduce the effect of, or to reduce the likelihood of successful attacks.
Again, sort of slightly prying into my very limited knowledge of AI. So you might give me a forward defensive on this one, Joe, but is the potential role of AI in helping to support those that are building these systems, is that a key opportunity for AI within the security space? Because those cutting of corners, if you like, of humans under pressure, just wanting to get things done, etc., is that where AI can come in and support with that? Checking to make sure that everything's fully secure? Or is that sort of just kicking the issue down the road?
Well, I think AI absolutely has a role to play in analyzing, vastly complex scenarios, prioritizing, giving input, but you're still going to need, you still have to do quality assurance on what the AI is helping you prioritize. Mm-hmm. And so it can help you get through the work, it can help you code faster, but the humans then shift from being the creator of the code to the quality assurer of it. And so I think AI can help us accelerate the creation of resilient systems, but you're still going to need to assure that it's worked properly and been done effectively and the right principles are applied. So I think AI is a massive opportunity from a technical development perspective and an analysis of risk perspective. And that creation of risk transparency. So I think we need to pull on all of those things, and we need to still quality assure that the real risks are really being mitigated against.
And we need those humans that are in that loop to be fully educated, coming back to our previous point about the perspective and view that they have of the assets they're building.
Well, but the problem we've got is we've been trying to educate them, like we've been saying earlier, we've been trying to talk about collaboration, and it's just not worked. And so what I'm interested in is trying to find a way to get people to change the way they work around this. And I think that an analogy to draw from is the way, going back to industry, is the change in health and safety culture that we've seen over 40, 50 years in industry, in society. Now, I'm not talking about us getting to the coddling of the business mind and in terms of, avoiding all risk. I'm talking about being informed. If you look at the way that the culture of safety was changed via engaging with the people who are doing the work, who are at risk, and getting them, as my partners in Insigniam say, in one of our businesses, getting them to invent their future is the way that you get people to change their behavior. And so I don't think it's about educating. I think it's about enabling, informing people of what's going on and get them to create the way they're going to work securely. And I think the same is true as the application developers, is these development people. We shouldn't just be telling them, you must code like this. You need to be educated on the risk. What we need to do is give them the information about the scenario, explain that the company needs them, or the organization, society needs them to build securely, and ask them, well, how are you going to do it? And get them to invent it. Because I think there's too much projection. And this is the shift I think we need to make that we haven't done, is actually getting people to invent the way they're going to work.
It's fascinating, the sort of comparison that can be drawn from what you've just described to, again, the sustainability leaders that I speak to, talking about embedding sustainability across the organization and how you want everybody to take on and be emboldened by their understanding and appreciation of the issues, and then take ownership of, well, how can I contribute to making our organization operate more sustainably, in whatever way that might be. It's essentially the same principle.
But it's got to come from within them. You can't just shout at people until they do it.
No.
It's got to be built from inside. It's got to be something that they have got on board with.
And do you see that with the CISOs that you work with, that there are those that have that capacity to sort of inspire the people that work within their organizations to take this on? Is that now a key role that the CISO has to communicate about these issues and inspire people to take action?
Yeah, I absolutely think they're there to inspire and to pull the organization along. But I still, unfortunately, think it's relatively rare in the community. There are a couple of CISOs I can think of who have got into that position of inspiring their organizations and pulling them along. But I must say, many CISOs, they're basically, they feel under such pressure to secure the company, and they feel at personal risk that if it goes wrong, am I out of a job? And so I actually think that we have an issue with the function itself. And this is part of the work that actually the risk transparency work I talked about, and getting that engagement on where the assets are, helps reduce the stress on the CISO, because that's one of my submissions, is sort of to try and reduce the stress of the CISO role, because I actually think many of them are under such pressure, either from the regulator or their business, or, it cannot go wrong because cyber's this or that, or they feel that the board, to the earlier point on the research, they think it's all fixed. The CISO knows it's not all fixed. And so they end up in a very stressful scenario. And so I actually think that while we need to get into that position of inspiring the organization, getting people to engage with and behave in a secure way because they believe it and understand it, is the right way to go, I still think we're stuck in a world where the CISOs are under mega pressure. They've got backlogs of, technical things that haven't been done, and they can't quite make that leap forward to let go of some of that stuff or make sure that's managed while they then work on the longer term improvement. It's still firefighting, short term, got to get this next thing done, got to respond to an audit finding, etc.
Need to liberate the CISOs out there. I need to liberate.
Well, no, they need to liberate themselves.
Okay. Yeah.
I actually think I believe strongly in agency. They've got agency. They can actually change the way they do their jobs. And this idea that I'm being pushed around by everything else, I don't buy into that. That's the coddling of the American mind, as was described in the good book.
Here. Joe, I tell you what, I've not had a timer on for the show, so I've got absolutely no idea how we're talking about, but it's been brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing all your insight on the article. We'll conclude now with the magic wand.
Yes.
Joe, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
So my magic wand would be to make it transparent which security technologies work and which don't. So I would want us to be able to, as consumers of security solutions, to be better able to independently understand, do they really work or not? Or how well do they work? The efficacy of security. Because I think that that's a market failing. We have a market failing at the heart of cybersecurity, which is we spend more and more and more on technology every year, and we continue to suffer attacks. So something's not working. Now, we've talked a lot about risk transparency. We've talked about the human factor. But I have to say that as an industry, we're failing our customers because, and I've been on this hobby horse for 6 years now, since I wrote a report about the market for lemons and the information asymmetry that exists between the buyer of security and the seller. The seller knows everything about how their product works. It's very hard for the buyers to really evaluate, which means that we spend a lot of money putting in a lot of tech without really knowing whether or not it's going to work or how well it's going to work or what the vulnerabilities are. And the pressure on the vendors to bring products to market is very high because everybody, it's a hot market. You've got to get your technology out. We've got to get ahead of the other cybersecurity vendors, which means corners get cut and solutions come to market that aren't effective. So I would like, the same way that you have an MOT or seatbelt testing, I think there should be testing of security products. You almost, people just sort of bury their head in the sand a little and say, look, I'll just trust if I go with a big brand, it's the right thing to do, or everybody else is doing this, so I'll get it done. But have you really solved the security problem? It's very hard to get the time to stand back and look at that. There are some actually leading lights out there that have their own security teardown labs. They won't buy a technology unless they've tested it in their labs and broken it down. Those people, I cheer for them. They're doing a great job, but they have big budgets. They're big banks. They can do that. But most organizations buy security on trust of the vendor. And I don't think the vendors are inspected enough.
And I was going to say, those big banks are not engaging in collaboration or partnership efforts on sharing.
Well, they do.
Or are they?
No, I do. I think there's quite a good collaboration in the security community amongst the banks.
Okay.
But they're just so busy looking after their own stuff that knowledge doesn't trickle down into the rest of the economy. So I think that there are really, high quality, responsible people working in the banks, but they're just so busy solving their own problems and the knowledge they gain from those security teardowns. Also, then they get into issues if they start showing that because the vendors might take them to court, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to do something to unlock the transparency of security efficacy.
I want to understand a little bit more about your idea for this sort of MOT, if you like, when it comes to these technologies. How would that work in practice? Would that be a regulatory requirement, or how would it play out? So
I did a bit of work on this with a group of CISOs a few years ago, and with industry experts and the government. And the solution we sort of got to was the idea being that if you want to sell a security technology and you want to sell it into a certain market, even a regulated market, that you have to have it independently tested by a testing organization like Bureau Veritas or TÜV. There are various testing organizations that they test food safety, they test toys before they come to market and can be sold to children. In the same way, you could have security testing labs. Now, the telecoms industry has independent labs that test equipment before they go into the network. And it's as simple as that. So have independent testing labs that produce results that describe not, this is secure or not secure, but gives a risk-based view of these are the strengths and weaknesses of this security solution. If you're going to buy it, be aware of this or that. And it would be as simple as that. And those labs could then be audited to make sure they're working effectively. It's like an accountancy.
Now, it sounds like a beautifully simple and well-presented solution to the problem that you've highlighted. one of the things that immediately concerns me and draws comparisons to other parts of our conversation today is the mention of a few years ago.
Yeah.
You had this conversation.
Yeah.
Why isn't this happening?
So the industry doesn't want it to happen, of course, because they are, we just want to make money. I think the buyers want it but can't. So enterprise that buys security technology, they want more transparency, but they're so busy trying to keep up with tech transformation that they can't prioritize doing that. Every time I speak to procurement organizations or things like that, they're like, yeah, we would like to demand that transparency when we're buying. But I think it's at its heart, we probably just as a society are still prepared to accept the risk. I think that's probably what it is, is that we all are saying, yes, we need security. Yes, we need to do the right thing. But because not everybody's been affected by it, people don't yet prioritize it. But you can be sure the executives from Jaguar Land Rover, from M&S, they know the pain and they would be pushing for this kind of thing.
Well, here. Let's hope in the next few years we see things develop on this front. Joe, thank you so much for joining me this morning. You've been very gentle hand-holding me through all things cybersecurity, but it was a fascinating insight. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlie.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A massive, massive thank you to Joseph Hubback for joining me on today's show. This episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the mark of trusted communications. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.